Right, Jode, if you want to get yourself ready,
Okay.
as we said last week, actually saw Jodie do something similar, and we had a very brief discussion about this idea, and got her to volunteer to come into the group and do it with us. So without further ado, like that, Jode?
I do indeed.
It was a bit French, that was.
Well,
We'll hand you over.
well, thank you very much for the big build-up there, Tony. So this one's got a slightly different title to the previous one. This one is called Business Bounce-back-ability, and in the build-up that Tony's been detailing in LinkedIn and Facebook, he's been talking about, he's been likening it to how big businesses do things. I might not know this about me, but I studied biology at university, so I thought this was a fitting quote from Charles Darwin, very relevant to today's times. It is not the strongest of the species that survive, but the one most responsive to change. Seems very apt for right now. Moving on to the concept of big businesses. So we help companies implement management systems. Typically things like ISO 9001 for quality, ISO 14001 for the environment, what is now ISO 45001 for health and safety. Now you may or may not know this, but there's also an ISO, an international standards organisation, standard for business continuity. But it doesn't really matter what the standard is, they all revolve around the concept of plan, do, check, act. And regardless of whether or not you have any intention of implementing a formal management system, hopefully there will be something in this for you today. So one of the things that Tony commented on was the fact that I would make available a business continuity questionnaire. And this is the one that we've made available via our training portal. You'll see the link for it later on in the session. I'm not expecting you to read it now. All I wanted to show you is that it's a reasonably comprehensive list of suggested topics. And we're going to delve into some of those topics as we go through the session today. Obviously, we all know that we're sat here right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. And I'll be completely honest here and say, as a company specialising in compliance consultancy and training, we did, of course we did. We had a business continuity plan. It would have been remiss of us not to do so. But I have to be completely honest in saying, whilst we had the pandemic on, or pandemics and epidemics on the list, the reality is the last time anybody really saw something on this scale was the Spanish flu of 2018, which means there isn't a single person alive today that is likely to be able to remember anything of the scale that we see before us today. So the closest analogy we've got is something from the movies, which means without that knowledge and that empathy, it's difficult to really understand until it happens to us what the consequences are. Because let's face it, none of us have never ever thought that a lockdown was going to be conceivable in our lifetime. My parents are still in shock. So, going back just to set the scene, yes, Ian, I can see a smile. Yes, that really is me. Circa 1996 in Russia. So I was when I was at university. Not only did I study biology, but I was in the university's Royal Navy unit. And this is relevant to the story because this is probably the first time that I really started to appreciate the importance of business continuity. So there were some things that we did as students. We had fun practicing man overboard drills, flinging the lifeboat, the boy overboard, rescuing it. That was always great fun. But it wasn't that. It was another exercise that we did that really brought it home to me. You see, even as students bobbing around in the ocean with 5 proper Royal Navy crew, actually, if something happened, if something went wrong, we were the crew. And actually, it was therefore really important that we knew how to act in an emergency scenario. Now, we would take different roles, and a couple of times I happened to be appointed, the epaulets there denote midshipman, and a couple of times I was the senior mid response, and we had an emergency sounded. So what we had to do, as you would expect from the Royal Navy, is to grab the standing orders and follow the procedures. And I have to say, the first time I was in charge, it was a bit like that. I'd have lost the ship, I'd have lost the people, because it wasn't automatic. But you know what? There was no substitute for that experience, because the next time they decided to burn the ship while it was my turn to be on charge, I'm happy to report I had a much better idea of what I was doing and why I was doing it and how to do it. And so I didn't have a repeat of that imaginary burning inferno. But that was when it really got me the importance of not just having a business continuity plan, but of practicing it and refining it. So, some holiday snaps. So we've moved from Russia, we're now in Paris. And this picture was taken on Thursday, the 12th of November, 2015. I can be that precise about it because what happened next, you may recall, was the attack on the Bataclan Theatre, the stadium, and the cafes. So the night we arrived in Paris, the Eiffel Tower was all lit up, as it's known for being the City of Lights. On the 13th, we went up the Eiffel Tower. In fact, we were possibly coming down from the Eiffel Tower as the attacks started elsewhere in Paris. So we ended up with a really unusual set of tourist photos. That's what we saw on the Saturday. The last time the Eiffel Tower had been in darkness was wartime. And we also got one like that, where it's in the 3 colours. Now, the reason I've taken you to Paris is on a much smaller scale, much like the pandemic, the attacks caused disruption to businesses. We saw businesses being shut down. We booked to go and do a bus trip around Paris that we weren't able to do. There were police guards, so it wasn't so much social distancing then as anybody in uniform was watching you closely to see what you were up to. This caused disruption, and this may sound a bit scary, and you may think, but it's not going to happen to me. But I did some research, and you're not going to like this. This is a bit of a timeline since that date. So we had Paris, 130 deaths. Followed by, you may not even remember all of these things, but attacks in Brussels, Nice, Munich, Normandy, Berlin, the Louvre, and then very quickly we had London. You may remember the Westminster Bridge, Stockholm, Paris again, then London again on the London Bridge, and then I stopped when I got to Manchester Arena, the Ariana Grande concert. There have been other things since then, but crucially, the nature of terrorism, you can see from, they're now targeting innocent people. With the concert, that was children. So this not only has a lasting impact on the people who are directly dying here, or if you tot up the number of wounded, the total number wounded across all of those incidents is about 4.5 times higher again. So all of those people affected, either fatally, or some of those injuries are life-changing injuries. Either way, there's a huge personal toll, much like COVID-19 is doing to the whole of society right now. But at a local level, I saw firsthand the impact in Paris. It was shut down. That impacted lots of organisations there and then. Manchester, obviously the arena couldn't reopen for some time. after that, as they and that will have impacted on the train stations and any neighbouring businesses as well. So I don't mean to to make you upset, especially as this week is not only Business Continuity Week, it's also Mental Health Awareness Week. But I did want to show you that even though you may not think of a terrorist attack as being significant to your business, you might want to just rethink it. And certainly some of the impacts of terrorism are not dissimilar to what we're seeing with COVID-19. But another reason I stopped at the concert is not long after that, later that year, I got called to go and do a health and safety audit in a football stadium. I had to search long and hard to find something that hopefully doesn't tell you which stadium it is. But crucially, I was doing a health and safety audit alongside a counter-terrorism expert. Quick tip from me, actually, a lot of, if you're following sound health and safety practices, it will enormously help to eliminate some of those terrorist attacks as well. One of the biggest eye-openers for me was in terms of basic things like basic housekeeping. I can't go into too much detail without because I want to keep the client's details confidential. But suffice to say, this is still an issue. Okay, so there's terrorist attacks. You've already heard from Chris that bad guys out there aren't just attacking us physically. These days there's more on cyber attacks as well. Chris has obviously spent a long time talking about that a few days ago, so it needs no further explanation from me. And just before I finish on the bad stuff, there are still the good old-fashioned, if I can call them that, burglars that may be physically trying to gain entry to your property. And what I'm trying to do in getting you to think about all of these things is to think about what could go wrong, so that ultimately, if you think about which of these impacts, which of these things could happen in your organisation, it starts to allow you to think about what controls do you need to put in place to stop things from going wrong. Okay, so that's enough of people attacking us. But then we have the weather. So adverse weather conditions. This was a picture taken, when was the last big snow in the UK? Oh, of course, everybody's on mute, sorry. Anyway, whenever it was bad enough that once again, Britain ground to a halt, as Britain is inclined to do. Now, I've used this picture, but adverse weather conditions can be, it can be blowing a gale, which can mean leaves on the line. It can be, last year I lived through, once you go above 3 days above a certain temperature, you're in a heat wave, and actually you then can't do anything in those conditions either. So adverse weather can impact on your business. Now, I'm quite sure that even if you can confidently say that you've not been attacked and you won't have a terrorist attack or a cyber attack, or you've never had a theft, I'm pretty confident that adverse weather has impacted on you at some point in the past, which means it's reasonably foreseeable that it will do again. Oh, I didn't know it did that. So apart from adverse weather, this year, before COVID hit, of course, there was flooding. Now that, whereas some of the things I was just looking at, like theft, may impact on just your organisation, flooding may impact on an entire region again, which again causes delays to the opening of your the opening of your business, the reopening of your business. It causes waste because all of the furniture and the equipment that you've got becomes contaminated and needs to be disposed of, which means it costs money, which pushes insurance premiums up. All of these things come into play. And if you don't know this already, you can download for free from the Environment Agency website, or actually in the checklist, I've given you links to the Environment Agency, Natural Resources Wales, and to the Scottish protection site as well. So you can actually do your own flood plans. You can even check to see whether or not you're in an area at risk of flooding, because that's going to be the first step to understanding, does this actually even apply to you? So I have deliberately put this in this sequence. So we started off with a bit of snow leading to flooding, and last year, of course, Greta Thunberg hit the headlines with all the protests. Now, again, this may seem like it's many, many miles away from most of us. This was happening in big cities around the world, including London. But some organisations could be affected by civil disturbances. So something to bear in mind, depending on where you're located. And let's not forget about the physical transport infrastructure, for instance. We all know what happens when the M4 jams up. It grinds to a halt, and it's one of the things that I most definitely do not miss since moving away, because the number of times I've read that the thing I used to do so many times myself about getting stuck in that traffic, I do not miss it at all. But when that traffic grinds to a halt, we're losing all of that useful working time, that productivity. Let's hope that one good thing to come out of COVID is that people will no longer place such reliance upon the need for face-to-face meetings, and let's hope that there is a greater acceptance now of the ability to use things like Zoom for meetings, and in turn helping to reduce the impact on the environment. Okay, so that was there is more information in the checklist. When you get the checklist, it doesn't cover things like man overboard drills, despite the fact that I started with those earlier on. So you may find that depending on your industry, there are extra things to add, but it should give you a reasonable starting point in terms of where to go. Now, I said I'd share the link with you. So this is our online training portal. At the moment, it's mainly got free content on there, mainly tools and things to download for free. One of the things that we've been doing in response to the downturn is we're converting some of our face-to-face training to online content. That's still an ongoing thing, but there are quite a few forms there now, including the checklist. So that's all the w's.penarth.thinkific.com. And as well as the checklist, there's a couple of other documents that you may find of use, also entirely free. So I said before that the questionnaire kind of gets you thinking about what could go wrong. And there's 20 odd pages there. So if you find that there's some things that are just not relevant to your organisation, you can cross them out or amend it. It's there very much as a starting point. But once you've decided that, yes, actually, my business is at risk of fire, that's a common one, then hopefully it will prompt you to think about, well, if I had a fire, it could destroy everything. These things would be damaged, and actually there are some controls to take. So there's the impact form, and there's another one getting you to think about the level of risk, because once you understand all of this, you can start to implement the controls. So taking the example of fire, you can do what should be being done anyway in bigger organisations. There should be fire risk assessments. For instance, the fire risk assessment is likely to inform you that you should have extinguishers, that you should have emergency lighting, and the questionnaire just gets you thinking about some of those things that you could possibly even should already be doing, but it gives you a starting point. So having developed those control mechanisms, the important part is to test. Remember I said right at the beginning in my ERNU, University Royal Navy Unit days, it really struck home to me the importance of business continuity because we tested it and we practiced it, and that's when I actually got good at it, and it stopped being difficult and became automatic reaction. Now this can be group emergency scenarios, because things like cyber attacks you don't want to happen, but it's good to have the team working through some scenarios in cyber attacks. Or what if it's a loss of a key member of personnel? How would you cope? Now actually, ironically, COVID-19 is making us think about lots of these different impacts simultaneously. It's making us think, what if we can't get into the building? I know our IT providers were very busy in the early days of lockdown because not everybody had their laptops, not everybody could work from home without investing in IT. Whereas had they have planned and asked these questions, they may have been able to carry on more quickly at the start. But some of the tests can be by means of internal audits, because if you know, if you've got your systems in place, some of the checks, like on fire systems, you know, are you doing those fire drills regularly? Are the fire doors open and accessible during the course of the working day? All of those things can be safely checked by means of an audit, as well as some of the emergency test scenarios. And here's an example of something that cropped up from an audit finding. So this was for a landscaping company, and we've, in their case, we've given them some software to help them manage their systems. And they introduced the software version of the audit template and spotted a trend straight away. And even though their guys had supposedly been doing manual audits on a bit of paper, the very first time they switched to using it this way, where there was that sense of accountability because it was an individual logged in, what they learned was that their spill kits and first aid kits for the for company vehicles were not up to date. So that picture was there to remind me of that story. Now that seems quite a small scale thing, but this company has done really well by fixing those small scale things. They've really cut down on the bigger issues that may have happened in the past. And of course, it's important to learn from experience. So this is a picture from a company following an explosion. Now, an explosion of a battery doesn't sound very much, but this was a lithium battery that exploded. Now, this company did have procedures in place. They'd even tested them. But what they hadn't done was test them at all times of the potential working day. Now, this battery exploded early in the morning. It was as factory workers were coming in, and this is where they discovered a breakdown in the system. Factory workers were coming in and they were signing in. Office-based staff were also coming in to work. They didn't have to sign in. So they grabbed the fire drill, took the roll, and realised they actually didn't have a clue who was there. So not only have they tested the process, but now it becomes important to learn from that experience as well and adjust that process. So now, for that particular organisation, the process has changed, and for safety reasons, now it's important that staff all log in so that they can, you know, there is no danger that anybody is going to be left behind. So we started with Charles Darwin, and we're back there. He's not the strongest of the species that survived, but the one most responsive to change. And even the thinking here changed. If you think that a phrase that Darwin is often credited with, but was actually one suggested to him, survival of the fittest. And I like to think that if we put all these controls into place, we can build bigger, fitter businesses, ones that are going to be more robust and help us bounce back better. And so I'm just going to leave you with an image of one of nature's most incredible species, most recognizable, of course, for the incredible change that it goes through, the butterfly. And so that is my session on business bounce back ability, and I've just realized I haven't had chat on at all the way through. So are there any questions?